Welcome everyone, it's Benn Harradine here, sportchef of the Svensk Cricketförbundet. But for those of you who don't know, I've actually had a bit of a career prior to coming over to the administrative side of sport. But before we get into that, of course, as you know, we'll be discussing tonight the mental game. And what we're going to cover, we're going to be going through a few things. So what makes up our mental capacity? And then we'll also be learning a little bit on how to understand ourselves using emotional intelligence. And then how we can take action now. So walking away from this seminar with something to use in our day-to-day training, in our day-to-day lives, in regards to the mental game. But as I was saying, I had a little bit of a career in sport before coming over to cricket. I was actually a discus thrower. And I say it's because it was a very big part of my identity. But, you know, I've retired and I'm very proud of what I've done. And I'm also mostly very proud of the journey that I had and I shared with many of the world's greatest coaches, including my own father, who was my coach for many years. But I got to see a lot of good things. 3 Olympics I participated at, 5 World Championships, 5 Commonwealth Games, and I was actually the Commonwealth champion in India, in Delhi. It was a fantastic, hot Indian summer's evening with 70,000 people in the stadium, and I upset the local Indian chap by winning the gold medal. So I was both a hero and a villain at the same time. But I'm also still the reigning Oceania discus record holder. Here are just a couple of images. This is me throwing at London Olympics in the qualifying rounds. Again, at Gold Coast at the Commonwealth Games. And in Germany, wearing my famous Bavarian suit that I prided myself on throughout my career. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk a little bit about the mental game. And as you know, we can train our bodies extensively. We can put a lot of effort in the gym. We can put a lot of effort in on the park, in the nets, wherever you may be. But it's really about our mind and how well we can control our mind, and that helps us the most. One of the things that I unfortunately didn't have the pleasure of learning when I was a young athlete. I had to learn a lot by doing and discovering through asking many, many questions, was that I didn't really tap into the mental game early enough in my career. I had to really sort of delve into that by going through some considerable upsets, considerable disappointments. But I don't regret anything because it's led me on this path, and I'm hoping that I can share some of that information with you all tonight. So a little bit about how our mind works. As you know, our thoughts and our behaviours and emotions, they're all interconnected. So what we think affects how we feel and act. How we feel affects what we think and what we do. And what we do affects how we think and we feel. Now, to give you a few practical examples of how this works, if you can think of how emotions might present themselves in behaviours. So, for example, if you are feeling down in the dumps, if you're feeling frustrated, how does that present itself as a behaviour on people, not only on ourselves, but on our competitors? And this can be both something that we can use to help understand ourselves better, but also our competitors. For example, let's say we're in a match. The bowler's just ripped through our opening order. Now it's my turn to face that same bowler. And I'm heading in, and my team are depending on me to score runs. Now, my thoughts might be, geez, I hope I don't get out first ball. I'm really worried and afraid that I will fail. And how do those thoughts affect our behaviours? I feel now, giving this presentation, that I'm quite nervous. And it's not because I don't understand the topic I'm talking about, but it's because I'm concerned that the technique I'm using might fail on me. And I notice that the way I'm behaving is my heart rate increases, my breath shortens. So that's how that behavior or those thoughts affect what I'm doing in this present moment. But another practical example that you could see, or you could compare with, is in the last 3 overs. If you're a bowler and your last 3 overs have been particularly rubbish and you just can't seem to pitch the ball where you want it, and you get really frustrated. And how is that emotion affecting your behavior? And these things we can both use for and against ourselves. But one of the greatest things is that we can control how our mind works. We really have a great deal of control over how these things affect us and to what degree. And we'll get into that in just a few minutes. But when we're talking about our competitors, thinking also about what behaviors do you recognize in your competitors? What thoughts they are having you can't see, but you certainly can see the way they're behaving. Dropping shoulders, heads down, dragging their butt along the ground, dragging arse, as we say. How are those behaviors key in helping us with a strategy in the way we play the game? Are we able to pick up patterns? Are we able to induce patterns in our opponents? And how can we use that to get the most out of our performance? So things to consider also. A word that I hear thrown around the sporting world very, very often is, you just got to be mentally tough. But the question really remains is how do we do that? How do we become mentally tough? You can see from this diagram that it isn't as simple as just going to the gym and becoming mentally tough. There are certain components that we can actually target or work on to create mental toughness. A lot of the old school coaches are big on grit, pushing people to the limits, helping them to try and control their emotions. But modern day are using or interacting with different parameters in a training session that helps them to understand different situations, how their emotions affect their thoughts and behaviors, and so on and so forth. But one of the themes that Jonty talked about last week was fundamentals, and confidence in our abilities, as you can see here, is an element of mental toughness, comes from doing fundamental things correctly or efficiently. That gives us confidence, but it doesn't mean that we are mentally tough. So there are more and more things that we need to consider rather than just becoming mentally tough. A question for you all: do you train your brain? Something to think about. Okay, so how do we understand ourselves better? And this is key before we start using the mind games and the mental toughness and the mental games with our competitors. It's all about how we function at best. And this next slide I'm going to spend a little bit of time speaking about, because this is probably one of the greatest learnings that I've had in my career, in understanding emotional states and the energy conditions. Now, if you can see, we have 4 squares. We have a highly positive condition, a highly negative condition, a low positive condition, and a low negative condition. Okay, and in those squares we have the capacity to do a task. Say, for example, we're going out to bat. Now, research shows that we are able to access 85 to 90% of our capacity in a highly positive emotional state, where we feel dedicated, motivated, energetic, powerful, cooperative, grateful. These are all highly positive conditions. And on the flip side of that, in a highly negative condition, where we feel afraid, remember, I used that example before. Bowlers rip through our opening order. I'm going out there and I'm worried about producing a score for my team. I'm afraid, I'm worried. And likewise with angry and upset, the feeling of revenge and resentment, that enables us to use only 60% of our capacity. And then, of course, we have a low positive condition, relaxed and sleepy, tired, uninvolved, careless, low motivation. That gives us roughly around 25% of our capacity to do a complex task. A perfect example of a low positive condition and a task that's fantastic in that state is sleeping. Low negative condition, bored, disinterested, irritated, anxious, flat. Only 10% of our capacity. Now, this morning when I got up and had breakfast, I tried to open a glass of jam, right? And the lid was exceptionally hard to open, and I felt myself getting really angry and upset. And I'm thinking, I'm trying so hard, but I just can't seem to get this lid open. Well, there's no wonder I was only able to access 60% of my capacity to do that task. However, if I felt motivated and energetic that I'm going to rip the lid off this jam, bang, off it comes. Completely different states. And the interesting thing about these energy conditions is that we can control them at any moment. But the first thing we need to do in this is to recognize where we are. Switching on, switching off. Today they use a saying called mindfulness, which is really just an expression to recognize what state we're in at this current moment. So the beauty of first recognizing our own energy conditions is that we can change them at any one moment, but we often wait too long to do something about it. For example, if you're in a performance and you feel yourself consistently getting more and more frustrated, it's often too late before you can do anything. You're out, you're on the bench. It's only in hindsight that you recognize that you probably should have reflected on what state am I currently in and how can I shift myself from highly negative into a highly positive condition. Sounds quite simple, but it takes practice. So centering is something that's based on finding a constant, and often the easiest thing to use is breathing. So if you feel yourself being in a highly negative condition or a low negative condition, the first thing you come back to is your breath, because you can recognize you follow 5 or 6 breaths. It gives you a chance to reflect, and it gives you a chance to shift from where you are into where you want to be. Okay? Hoping this is making sense. I'll get to some questions at the end. So there's one thing that we're missing here, and it's how do we shift? Well, there's so many different ways you can do it, but to give you some practical examples, if you feel that you're in a low negative condition, or you recognize that you're in a low negative condition, things like music, high energy music that give you a good feeling of euphoria, that give you a feeling of energy. Using these triggers in music can bring you into a highly positive condition. Likewise with clips on YouTube, for example. I used to watch clips prior to competition because I felt that I like to be going into a competition with an energetic and powerful mindset, an energetic and powerful positive condition, because I knew that that was giving me the ability to access 85 to 90% of my capacity. So those are just a few examples, but there are many, many that are very much unique to us, but we need to practice them in a training setting. Gratitude is often used very, very much these days. For example, expressing gratitude for challenging situations rather than becoming immediately a victim, saying that I'm grateful that this is happening for me because I feel dedicated and motivated that I can meet this challenge, rather than becoming angry or upset that it's happened, you approach it with a completely different energy condition. All right, so I'm missing one here. You're probably asking, where's 100% of my capacity? And this is something that's being researched a lot today, and it's called flow. Often it's called in the zone, but if we think about who is in flow or who demonstrates flow very, very frequently, well, jazz musicians who have to improvise on the spot, rappers, sports people, for example, everyone can feel flow. But what is flow? Who has ever felt like they've been in the zone, like you could stop time? You're just striking the ball, you can't put a foot wrong, everything's just happening for you. It happens very infrequently, but it's actually something that is accessible in all of us. And so much so that Red Bull today is spending millions of dollars on a program called the Flow G-Node Project. And it's backed by neuroscientists because they know that a lot of the people that are part of the Red Bull organization are extreme sports people, and they have to be in flow quite often because they have no room for error. So their optimal performance condition is based upon how they can shift their energy state into flow as often as they possibly can in order to perform at an incredibly high level. So flow, if you have the time, check it out, the Flow G-Node project. There's a lot of research being done by Red Bull and by other companies at the moment, but I'll show you a few practical examples of how that might look in just a few moments. So how can you train your brain, or how can I train my brain? Well, think about scenarios in your life where energy conditions or feelings have resulted in undesirable actions that you've taken, and how you might better serve yourself in the future by stopping for just a moment to reflect, where am I at the moment? I use a great example. One day I was driving my car and I ran into a post in a garage, and a series of events happened after that 4 or 5 times because I was really upset from driving my car into the garage. I was angry and frustrated for like 2 hours afterwards. And these series of actions that I took afterwards were a result of me not stopping and reflecting for that one split second and bringing myself out of that state and into a different energy condition. So think about scenarios where your energy conditions or your feelings have resulted in undesirable actions and how you might better serve yourself in the future. For example, screaming at an umpire. That's a good one to start with. Pause to take a moment to follow your breathing. This 5 to 6 breath cycle, if you have the time, in between balls, you know, if there's a fast bowler bowling, you have time while they're walking back to their crease to take those 5 or 6 breaths, reflect on what state you're in, go through a routine to bring yourself into a positive energy state to face the next ball. These routines are so important in sport. That they give us consistency, they give us confidence that we can use these routines in any situation and get the results that we desire. And practice these different techniques to shift your conditions. First, of course, most important is to reflect on where you are. Self-talk, gratitude, how your physical behaviors and your body language impact one another. There's also a fascinating TED talk for those who are interested further in looking into this, but Amy Cuddy does one on the proud pose, or the Superwoman or the Superman pose. And there's actually quite a lot of research being done about how we stand affects our thoughts, affects our emotions. Now, you might not think that standing like this, with your arms behind your back, standing up straight with your head up, could affect the way you feel and the way you think. But it actually does. Rather than this, slouching in your chair, how does that affect the way we think and the way we feel compared to standing up straight with your shoulders back. Completely different connections. Okay, so some practical examples. This is a guy that I coach privately. He's from Japan. We don't speak each other's languages, but he's a very talented athlete, and it's difficult for me to check in with him to see what kind of emotional state he's in before we start training. So what we do is we start with two different coloured balls. We have a yellow ball and a red ball. And I might start by throwing him the yellow ball, and he has to catch that yellow ball in his right hand only while we move around. So we start very simple. And if I check in with that, he's able to do that quite well. I'll start throwing him a red ball, and he has to catch the ball with his left hand. And then a progression on from there. If I know he's able to do those tasks, again, how much of their capacity are they able to use for a simple task like catching and throwing a ball? We move into a more complex, 60% of his capacity, left and right hand at the same time. Is he able to execute that well? If he's not, how can we shift him from the state that he's in into something that's more productive? But this is just an example for you to see where we started off very simple, one ball right hand, one ball left hand. The red is in his left, is it his left? And the yellow in his right. But we also have a stimulus here with the band against the wall, and I'm sending him in all directions. And tell me, as if you see from this video, what energy state do you think he might be in? Okay, so hopefully you're able to be answer here 85 to 90%, because this is, I do this with him quite often just to check in with what kind of state he's in. Some days when he's tired and exhausted, I don't get much from him, but we're able to shift him out of that state by doing things that I know give him the results that he desires. For example, something a little bit more fun, playing table tennis, you know, giving him a sense of euphoria or of happiness, of readiness to train. So priming him before a session. But first we check in to see what kind of state he's in. It gives us much more of a productive session if I know that we can go into the session in a good mindset and he's able to learn and execute what we're trying to get out of the day's session. Another one that's a little bit more complex, and it's just worth knowing here that the mind also has the ability to utilize 3 pieces of information at once. More than that becomes a bit more of a challenge. But as a rule of thumb, I would say that the mind is able to do 3 complex things at one time. More than that, you start to see things breaking down. Now, this is another athlete that I trained from Japan, same issue with the language. The task here is for her to weave in and out of these obstacles, catching the red ball with her left hand inside the obstacle and the yellow ball with her right hand outside the obstacle. And you'll see this is very complex. We had to bring her out of the one that I was demonstrating just earlier because she was very, very good at it. So I'm trying to push her just to see how she is improving the skill, but also I need to still be able to test her mind and see where she is. So this is another example of things that you can try in your own training or as coaches. You can see also she stops a little bit. I'm having to allow her time to be ready to go under because she stops a little bit. You can see her mind ticking over what's next. And also not the greatest catch here. Too much going on. All right, so these are fantastic exercises that you can use in training today or tomorrow to just see what emotional states your athletes are in or your players are in, and how you can shift them from one to the other. First, reflecting on where they are and how they might be able to use that in a more productive way. So now we've gone through what makes up your mental capacity, understanding yourselves. Remember, your emotional states, you have the ability to move in and out of them at any time, but it starts with first reflecting on where you are now and how you can take action. And I'm going to prime you guys with just one final thing before I address some of the questions, is that this is a super interesting question that I often ask athletes that I work with, coaches that I work with. What mindset do you have? Are you a fixed mindset person, or are you a growth mindset person? So to take this with you from tonight's presentation, consider these two things. Are you fixed mindset? Are you growth mindset? Do you learn from your feedback? Or is it you stick to what you know? You avoid challenges? Do you give up easily? Or do you like to try new things? Do you see your fails as an opportunity to grow? Something worth considering.